Well, hey guys, it's Darwin, and today I want to share another round of my top backpacking tips and tricks that I've learned over the past 10 years and well over 14,000 miles of backcountry adventure. Little things I do every single time I head out into the backcountry to make my time on trail more enjoyable. Today's video is specifically centered around cold weather and winter backpacking. The little things I've done in the past and some of the new things that I've just started doing to keep myself more efficient, warm, and comfortable when I'm out in cold temps on the trail. And like usual, most of these things are sort of no-brainers. Some of them are kind of old school tricks, and to be honest, most of these things I take for granted because I've done them for so long, but they could be super valuable to you if you're just starting your backpacking journey. All right, so to jump in, to start off right off the bat, the first round of tips and tricks and hacks that I have for you come down to keeping yourself and your important items warm when you're out in the backcountry. The first thing comes down to you keeping yourself warm while you're out hiking on a day hike or a backpacking trip, whether you're in the snow or it's just simply cold at high elevations. And the number one thing that people get cold from is because they don't properly regulate their body temperature. It's not necessarily because it's so cold outside. When it is cold outside and most of us go out, what do? We layer up. We put on a lot of layers. A base layer, a fleece, thermal jacket, and then an outer shell. And the problem is when you're being active and you're moving, having all of these layers can trap too much heat in and cause you to sweat. Then when you stop, whether it's at camp or you just take a long break on the trail, that cold air comes in and starts chilling you out because you are wet from sweat, whether it's your back, your chest, your legs, your arms, whatever. So to properly regulate your body heat, it's actually by using less layers, but using the right layers. Now, for me, the thing that I've done over the years is very simple. I hike in 3 main layers when it's very cold outside. First off, I'm gonna use some sort of a merino base layer right up against my skin. Now, whether that's a merino t-shirt or something like a merino sun hoodie, I want to wear merino because it's going to keep me warm, but it's also going to help wick away moisture and help with moisture management. On top of that, I usually wear an active fleece. Now, what do I mean by active fleece? Well, a fleece, a thermal fleece that can also breathe and help regulate that heat and that air. So a fleece that I've started wearing a lot lately is this fleece by Nerona. It uses this Alpha Direct fleece on the outside, so it's very airy, it's very meshy, and it allows the air and the moisture to escape so you don't overheat. The other thing that you'll notice about my 2 main layers that I'm wearing is both of them have a quarter zip. The reason for that is if I start to overheat on the trail, if I'm noticing that I'm getting too hot, I'm able to zip open my layers to help ventilate my body. And then on top of these, if it's super cold or it's windy, I'm gonna wear a shell. For me, I usually wear a rain jacket, whether it's an ultralight rain jacket or one of the new jackets that I've just recently picked up. Why? Because again, it's gonna help with moisture management. It's gonna help keep some of that heat in, but allow me to open it and vent it when I need to vent it. Now, when it comes down to a thermal jacket, like a down jacket or a synthetic insulation jacket, it's pretty rare that I'm gonna hike in one of those because, again, I don't want myself to overheat when I'm moving. I'm gonna reserve those layers when I stop, when I get to camp or I'm taking an extended break on the trail. So I keep that at the ready, but I typically don't hike in these layers unless it's just ridiculously cold. Now, I know a lot of people have started using the fishnet mesh base layer, and I've actually have some of those on order because I do want to give those a try, but this system using merino, using an active fleece has worked really well for me. And it really comes down to no matter what kind of base layer, mid layer, and shell that you're using, it comes down to paying attention to your body and making sure you understand when you're about to overheat because you don't want to sweat. If you sweat, you're gonna get cold when you stop. So that is the biggest tip that I have for anybody that's gonna be doing winter hiking, is to make sure you create a system that can really regulate your body heat. All right, next up is keeping your important items warm when you're at camp. Now, if you remember in a previous hacks video, my camp hacks video, I talked about how regardless of the temperature, and especially when it's chilly outside, I will always sleep with things like my battery banks, my camera batteries, and my water filters by simply putting them in the footbox of my quilt. That way, if the temps drop low at night, things aren't gonna freeze. Like my hollow fiber filter's not gonna freeze and break, and my batteries are not gonna be drained of their power. So the same applies here. I always put anything that can freeze and break or drain, and I put it in my footbox. But I do have a couple of hacks that can kind of help boost that and protect your items from draining and freezing, but also add warmth to yourself while you're sleeping. And one of these things is kind of an old school trick that has been around forever, and that is simply boiling water and putting it in a water bottle to put in your footbox at night. I know that I am the person that has advocated for years that having something like a Nalgene on the trail is totally heavy, it's overkill, and it's not worth having. And I've been a big advocate for disposable 1 liter water bottles. Now, if it's not cold temps, I will still always carry something like a disposable bottle. But when we're talking about cold temps, I still carry a Nalgene. Actually, I've started carrying a Nalgene a lot again lately on a lot of my trips. But specifically for cold weather camping, what I do and what a lot of people do to stay warm and to make sure that their things are staying warm inside of their quilt is before going to bed, it's boiling some water or boiling snow, melting down snow, filling your Nalgene with it, sealing that off, you got hot water in here, and then throwing that down in the bottom of your quilt. Not only does it keep your feet and your body warm throughout the night, it also makes sure that your water is not gonna freeze throughout the night, so when you wake up the next morning, you're not trying to drink ice. Using a disposable water bottle, again, it's great, it's ultralight, but when temps are low, your water can easily freeze in these because they are thin plastic. And as far as putting boiling water in these, I would never attempt to do that. Number one, you could have a lot of chemicals that could leach out of these, and they would melt super quick. So these are not efficient for that, where with this, handles hot water phenomenal. Now, if you're not a Nalgene person and you're still trying to go with an ultralight option because you're like, Nalgene's too heavy, you can actually also do that with a TPU water bottle like the Canuck Vesca. So this also holds hot water very well and won't melt. That being said, because it is a thinner plastic, I would recommend if you're gonna use one of these to put hot water in, that you at least put something like a sock or wrap it in a buff or wrap it in something extra so it doesn't melt anything inside of your quilt like the inside of your quilt or burn your actual skin. But by putting hot water in the footbox of your quilt, it helps keep all of your items warm, like your filter, your batteries. It helps obviously keep your feet warm and the rest of your body warm, and it makes sure that you don't have frozen water in the morning. All right, so you've put your important items in your footbox so they won't freeze or drain. You've put some hot water in there to keep your feet warm and make sure you have some non-frozen water in the morning. But another important thing that obviously we want to make sure isn't draining in our tents at night and dying is something like a cell phone. Because for a lot of us, not only do we use a cell phone for communication, but a lot of cell phones now work as SOS devices, navigation, and using it as a watch. You know, a lot of people don't wear watches anymore, they're using their cell phone. So obviously I don't want to throw this in the footbox of my quilt because what if I need it in the middle of the night? What if there's an emergency, I need to go grab it quick? What if I just need to check what time it is if I randomly wake up in the middle of the night? Or what if I need to set an alarm to wake up at a certain time? I don't want to go digging around in my footbox to get that. So something I've started doing is making sure that every fleece that I wear in the backcountry in cold temps has something like a chest pocket. It's actually something that I hated for a long time. I couldn't stand having a chest pocket up on my fleece until I really started utilizing it in cold weather backpacking. So now, if it's super cold outside, I always sleep with the fleece on. And what's great is I can take my phone if I have an alarm set for the next morning, or again, if I need that in case of an emergency, and I simply put that in my chest pocket. That way it's right here that I can easily grab it. So using fleeces that have a chest pocket, or even sleeping with a jacket that might have a chest pocket or an inner pocket, is a really good way to make sure that your phone is not going to get drained in the middle of the night. All right, so speaking of keeping your stuff warm and yourself warm at night when you're sleeping in cold temps, the next tip has to do with keeping yourself warmer and drier while you're sleeping at night. So if you've slept in super cold temps, especially in snow, you'll know that condensation can be a big problem no matter what type of tent they're using, simply because it's freezing cold outside and you are the warmest thing in that environment. So condensation is kind of bound to happen. Well, if you're like me, one of the things that I always seem to do throughout the night is when my face and my head start getting cold, I kind of pull my quilt up over my head and kind of create a little cocoon. The awful thing about doing this and trying to keep your head and your face warm is all of that moisture that's coming out of your mouth and your nose, all that warmth is getting trapped inside of that quilt and creating moisture, creating condensation on the inside, which, just like hiking, can make you wet and then make you cold if you get a draft. So obviously it's better to keep your face and your head outside. But if you do that, a lot of times you create a lot of condensation within the tent. Have you ever woke up in the morning and noticed that the most amount of condensation in your tent is right around your face? It's like right up by your quilt, it's right on the wall at your head, and it's right above you. Well, again, that's because what you're breathing out is the hottest and warmest thing inside of your tent, and it has moisture in it, so it's going to create more condensation. Well, something that I started doing this past year, instead of kind of pulling my quilt up and kind of tucking into my quilt and creating that condensation inside my tent, is I started sleeping with a buff over my nose and mouth. So by doing this, not only does it keep my face warm, so I don't feel like I have to pull the quilt up over my head, but what I've noticed is by doing it and using something like a synthetic buff over your mouth and your face has actually cut down on condensation inside of my tent. I think it's because it's not allowing so much moisture to shoot out into the tent. And some people have a problem with having stuff over their face, and I know what you might be saying, like, well, what about all that moisture? Is it staying by your face? I found that if you're using something like a synthetic buff, I don't get that as much. I've tried it with a merino buff, and I feel like that traps a little more moisture in. The actual buff itself gets wet and creates a lot of moisture and then freezes. But with a synthetic buff, by simply putting it over my nose and my mouth, it keeps me warm at night and it keeps that condensation down on the inside of my tent. So another little tip, trick, or hack is get yourself kind of, what has always been one of my absolute backpacking gear favorites, and try that out. See if that helps take down that condensation. See if it helps keep your face warmer so you don't feel like you have to put your head inside of your quilt, and overall just makes your sleeping in cold weather a little more comfortable and a little more efficient. All right, the next couple of hacks pertain to food and your cook system out on the trail. Now, a big cause of concern for a lot of people is your fuel, the fuel that you're using out in cold temps. And tons of people swear that isobutane is not good in cold temps, and the only type of stove to use is a white gas stove. Now, I have an MSR Whisper Light that I've had for years that does use white gas, but I still typically choose to take an isobutane stove with me, just because they're lighter, they're a little bit easier. All my gas is contained in here. I don't have to mess with a bottle of white gas or anything like that. So I still choose to take isobutane. That being said, by using isobutane, there are things that you need to do to make sure that it's not freezing and being less efficient on the trail. So one of the things that I always make sure that I do with my isobutane cans is right when I get to camp, before I start setting up my tent or doing anything, I'll get in my food bag, I'll get my isobutane can, and I'll put it inside of my jacket. Now, a lot of the jackets that I've started using lately have drop pockets on the inside that are absolutely perfect to put that in. That way my body warmth, while I'm moving around, is keeping the fuel in here and the gas is warm, so when I go to cook for dinner, the stove is still being efficient. And then at night, speaking of keeping things in your foot box, I always sleep with my gas cans. So that's something that I've added to my foot box. Now, right off the bat, a lot of you might be saying like, well, you're putting so much crap. You're putting water and you're putting your batteries and your filter and your gas in your foot box. How do you have that much room? Well, for my winter quilts, I always make sure that I get an extra wide and extra long quilt. That way I just have more room inside of that quilt to kind of store all of these things and to keep myself comfortable. I have my typical like 20-degree quilts that I still go pretty long and wide with that I use kind of in every season, but my 0-degree quilts that are specifically made for winter, I make sure I get them a little bit bigger so I have room for all this stuff. So anyways, I will take my gas can, put it in my jacket to keep that warm while I'm in camp, while I'm moving around, and then I will sleep with it in my foot box, so that way when I wake up in the morning, it's warm and it's ready to go. But the other thing you have to make sure with isobutane is that it's not completely sitting on the ground, on the cold ground, or the snow. Now, over the years, I have used things like these little Jetboil stands that do get your gas can up off the ground. These are great, they work just fine, but if I'm using something like my remote stove where I need to kind of tip the gas can upside down, this doesn't really work. And if you're gonna add one of these to your kit, you know, it's money you gotta spend, it's an extra thing, it's weight, whatever. There's an easier option that I've just started recently using, and that is by making a fuel can koozie, a ground barrier for my fuel cans. Now, if you remember from my food hacks video, I talked about how in cold temps, I always use something like a cook pouch. One of these insulated pouches, whether it's a Big Sky cook pouch like the one I bought, or one that I have made out of Reflectix like this. Very easy to make, super cheap to go buy the material, and you can make a ton of stuff from it. And I basically put my food inside of these to make sure that that cold air isn't penetrating the plastic and making my food cold. Well, by using that same Reflectix, I've taken my fuel can, set it down on the Reflectix, trimmed a circle, cut it out, and then took a lighter and sealed the edges and made basically like a sleeping pad for my fuel can. That way I'm creating a barrier between the cold ground and the fuel can. After this has already been in my jacket, it's warm, to keep the warmth on that can and to allow the fuel to perform at the best way it can perform, I guess. So by simply just taking some Reflectix and a lighter, you can create a great little ultralight, super cheap option that helps keep your fuel more efficient in cold temps. So go get you some Reflectix and make one of these along with one of these. Keep your stuff warm, folks. So the next thing is lighting your stove. Now, out of all the miles that I've hiked, out of all the different environments that I've been in, the temperatures, the elevations, I have personally never had a problem with something like one of these little mini Bic lighters, right? Classic little mini Bics, what I always carry typically in my backpacking kit. That being said, I know that these have failed on people because just like isobutane, this can freeze. The liquid in this can freeze, you can have a hard time with it. Or, you know, if this gets wet, it could simply not work because you couldn't get a spark out of it, something like that. So I always recommend that people carry some sort of extra fire starter with them when they are going winter backpacking, whether it's an extra lighter that you're keeping in a different area or some extra matches. But for me, I've kind of stopped using all of that. And when it comes to winter backpacking, I've actually started using a good old classic that's been around forever, which is a flint and steel, also known as a ferro rod. So this way, I am always able to create a spark and to start a fire. I don't have to worry about it being too cold. I don't have to worry about this getting wet or just failing. This will not really fail. As long as I have steel and a flint, I can start my stove or build a fire. The other reason I started using this in cold temps versus using a lighter is because if you're wearing super thick gloves, this is an absolute pain in the ass to try to strike and hit that button. So you're actually able to use a ferro rod when you have thick gloves because it's just striking it, right? So that is something that I've added to my kit. Now, again, I know there's a lot of people out there that are concerned about weight, and you know, this definitely weighs more than what a lighter weighs. But for me, the fact that I can use this in any temp, the fact that it's not gonna fail, the fact that I can use it with gloves without taking them off, makes it an essential thing that I've added to my kit for winter backpacking. All right, the last little tip, trick, or hack that I have for you is kind of a bonus hack, a bonus tip, and that's if you are specifically camping in very deep snow, and that is by carrying a shovel. Now, I talked about this in a previous video about how I started carrying a shovel along with some other items for avalanche safety and avalanche rescue. But the other reason that I carry one of these when I'm doing deep winter backpacking is so that I can dig a trench around my tent. And the reason for doing that is if you've ever camped in deep snow and your tent has been on snow, you've had to pack it down a little bit, and you've tried to set up in the morning. Or if you're wearing something like heavier duty boots, you've tried to set up and put your boots on, you'll know that your feet can start sinking down in the snow. It's a bit of a pain in the ass. So by simply taking a shovel and digging a small trench around the front of your tent under your vestibule, it allows you to be able to set up and kind of have a little platform to sit on and actually set up in your tent without sinking down in the snow. It also allows you to be able to put your boots on efficiently in the morning and not fight them as much when you're trying to kind of pull it up over your feet. So by using something like a snow shovel when you are in deep winter, again, this isn't something you're gonna carry if there's not super deep snow, but if there is super deep snow, if you plan on going out, by having a snow shovel, not only is it a good idea to have this along with the rest of a avalanche safety kit, like a probe and a beacon, but it allows you to be able to dig a small trench and make it more efficient to set up in your tent, either at night when you're camping or in the morning when you're going to put your boots on. All right, guys, that's it. Those are some of my tips, tricks, and hacks that I have specifically for cold weather and winter camping. Speaking of that, what are some hacks that you have for camping in the snow or getting out in cold temps? What are some things that you always do to keep you more efficient and warmer while you're out on trail in the winter? Leave me something down below and let me know your thoughts. Guys, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're taking care of yourselves. I hope you're taking care of each other. I love you, and as always, thanks for watching.